Hey folks, Jack here, lead author support specialist for BookFunnel. The following is one of our webinars that we recorded just yesterday on the topic of Patreon and subscription models for your author business. Our webinars are recorded live on Zoom, and anyone is free to attend. Attending live does mean that you can also engage with us in the Q&A section and ask questions if the topic is of particular interest for you. There should be a link in the description of this video to Calendly, where you can sign up for some of our upcoming webinars in case you do want to attend the live event. We will also be answering questions here on YouTube, so feel free to leave those in the comments of this video or any other video on the channel, and myself or one of our team members will be replying to those right here. So it's just another way that you can engage with our author support team and get answers to your questions about BookFunnel or self-publishing in general. While you're here, make sure you also subscribe to the channel so you can see our future uploads. Without further ado, here's the webinar. Hope you guys are doing well this morning or afternoon, whatever is appropriate for you. We are talking about Patreon and subscription models for your author business today. This is a topic that authors have requested from us in the past. And so I thought I would tackle this one specifically because I have some thoughts on this. Because I think this can be a very useful tool for authors, but at the same time, there's a lot of strings attached here with Patreon and some of the other platforms like it. And so that's kind of the discussion that I wanted to have around this, but also giving you some ideas of like how you could implement with your current author business and that sort of thing. I, of course, for those of you who may not know, I am our lead author support specialist here at BookFunnel. I am joined today by both Emma and Kelly. There are two other members of our author support team, and they will be in the chat today to help answer some of your questions. And they'll also at the Q&A here at the end be bringing your questions to me. So if you have questions, put them in the Zoom chat. And we will bring those up in the Q&A section at the end. Just go ahead and put those in there. They will be marking those questions with a star to just communicate that that question is going to be saved for the Q&A at the end of today's session. Also, I should mention a replay of this webinar will be made available to everybody who signed up, and that's going to be sent to you guys by email tomorrow. You're going to get a link to go and watch the replay. However, we try to get replays uploaded fairly soon to both the BookFunnel YouTube channel, which is kind of in its fledgling stages right now, but then also our video library, which you can actually access directly from your BookFunnel dashboard if you click on the videos icon at the very top menu on your dashboard. So a couple ways for you to access it there, and it might be available in one of those places a little sooner than within the next 24 hours. So if you're really itching to go back and rewatch it, we might have it available in either place today, but we usually try to get it up within 24 hours is the idea. And then also, if you want to join us in a conversation on this topic, you can join us on Facebook. We have two official BookFunnel Facebook groups. One that is BookFunnel Authors, that's our primary discussion group, and then BookFunnel Promotions, where authors can post and share their BookFunnel promos that they're hosting to help recruit other authors. Most of the discussion happens in the BookFunnel Authors group, though. So if you want to join us there for some extended discussion on this topic in that group, feel free to check us out on Facebook and join the group there if you have not done so already. So we'll go ahead and dive in here today. Kind of want to summarize first what we're going to cover in this webinar. Obviously, if there's anything that we miss, the Q&A is a perfect time for that. So if we're going through anything and you feel like there's something that got skipped or you have a question, go ahead and put that in the comments again, just as a reminder, and we will get to that in the Q&A. So we're going to talk about why Patreon works for authors, why it's an attractive business model, why there are many authors who use it and other services like it. How to set up some of your subscription tiers. That is one thing that you will have to do with Patreon and other services. Let me pause here for a second. Let's make a quick pit stop. You're going to hear me say that phrase a lot today, Patreon and other services. Sometimes I might just say Patreon. Just assume that I mean whichever service you choose. If you choose not to go with Patreon, you choose to go with something similar to it. Just understand that when I say Patreon, that's what I mean, right? In case I forget to add that qualifier. All right. We're going to talk about what you should offer in a subscription model, whether that be on Patreon or elsewhere. What are some of the things that your readers might be interested in? Some examples of content that you could include, and then also some alternative platforms. We're going to actually be really comparing three of the major platforms. There's more than three out there. All right. There's definitely other options out there, but three of the primary platforms that are like Patreon. There are some others that I'm sure will come up in the Q&A. We can discuss those as well too. But I want to focus on the platforms that are specifically this style of subscription platform, like Patreon. And we'll talk about those three primary platforms in that segment. And then we'll also finish up with some best practices and some common pitfalls of running a subscription service like this or running a Patreon and what all that entails so that you have, right, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? You know what to expect in all respects. So why does Patreon work for authors? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I sat down to write the outline for this webinar, the very first thing is that it's recurring income and stability. Patreon and other similar services, right, offer you predictability when it comes to your author income in a way that you don't always get from just selling books. All right, that's the dream, right? You have several hundred or 1,000 readers who are your patrons, who are paying you maybe $10 a month, and you pay all the bills, and right, that's the dream, right? So it gives you that stability, predictability. With some fair certainty, what your income from Patreon is going to be next month, right? That's probably, if you're doing everything consistently, it's probably not likely to swing back and forth too drastically because you're running a subscription model and you have more predictability in that regard. To connect this to your book sales, you don't have to rely just on your book sales if you have a Patreon or a subscription, right? So subscription models can bring some much needed diversification to your income streams. So it might not be that your Patreon is paying all of the bills for you, but just that you're getting some diversification in your income streams and you're able to again have income coming from multiple sources, so that income stability and predictability and all, again, the dream, right, that when you bring up Patreon that everybody thinks of, right, it doesn't necessarily have to be your primary source of income, right? In fact, it might just be 25% or less of your income, but that's still a chunk of your income that you can rely on and is going to be pretty stable and the same, right? But multiple income sources and streams of revenue is key for any small business, right? And you as an author, if you're approaching it as a business, that's really what you are. You are a small business in that respect, regardless of whether it's just you, right? And or you have maybe a virtual assistant helping you, or maybe you do have a small team, whatever position you're in, right? That's what you are. You're a small business. So having multiple streams of income is really helpful. Reader engagement is also a big reason why Patreon is a useful tool for authors or these types of models. You have an opportunity to now build a community around your books and engage with readers in a unique way. It's not like a newsletter. It's not like social media. It's maybe a little bit of a combination of both, but folks have a little bit more skin in the game if they are going to be, subscribed to your Patreon. And you'll also know which readers are really the most engaged with your books, with your writing. Who are your super fans? We're going to talk about that here in a minute as well, right? And you can build that snowball, right? Uh, this is great, especially for authors, because sometimes it feels like you've written a book, you've put it out there, and after that launch, right after that honeymoon phase, you don't feel like you have to write the next book, you have to produce the next thing, and that's always true. You do always need to be writing your next book. That never ends, right? But your subscription offerings can start small and grow over time. So maybe as an example, you write a monthly short story that's exclusive to your Patreon. It's only available there. Well, the first few months, that might not look like a very enticing offer to some readers. But let's say you've been consistent with that and you've done that for a year. And now there's quite a bit of content there that they would get access to just by signing up for your Patreon. And in that way, it can make things like your backlist or other exclusive content that you've already created or you've already done the work on, it makes that still work for you going forward because of that subscription model. You're not just reliant on that, those sales in that launch phase. Excuse me. You're you can offer maybe a whole selection of content in that regard, and that makes it look more enticing. And it also means you have a longer tail on essentially the sales that you're getting from all of that content, right? In this case, it's not exactly sales, it's a subscription, but I think you understand what I mean. You get a longer tail on that income from that content, right? So subscription tiers, this will inevitably come up. I'm going to talk a few points here that I want to make, and then I'm going to show a couple of examples. An example of, like, if you're just getting started out, like a real like beginner's subscription tier, right? Multiple levels that you could put on Patreon or what have you. And then kind of more of an advanced example. And both of those examples are going to be just that, examples. You can obviously do something totally different if you have different ideas or what have you. But a couple things to mention first. There are many different approaches that you can take to your subscription model. There's no one size fits all, right? If you see another author and they've set up their Patreon in a certain way, right? You don't necessarily have to emulate that or copy that, right? And if you're just starting out, simpler is probably better anyway, right? Different subscription tiers. We'll use Patreon as an example here. People are expecting different rewards for each of those tiers. And if you don't have something to offer them at each tier, or you don't have something enticing enough to offer them at each tier, those readers aren't going to be interested in signing up for a higher level tier, or maybe signing up at all, right? That you have to have something to offer them. So if you are getting started out, simpler is probably better. And that sometimes means fewer tiers and kind of keeping everything lower to the ground, right? You don't need to have 10 tiers when you're just starting your subscription or your Patreon in order to be successful. You can start with just a few, keep it simple, and build from there. Now, the price point you select for each tier has to make sense for you, and it has to make sense for the reader. So what are you delivering? Is it an ebook? Well, it's a digital product, not a whole lot of cost to deliver that, other than your upfront costs, any right cover artwork, editing that you've paid for, anything of that sort obviously is going to be a cost, but you're not delivering a physical product. So you don't have to factor in things like, well, your cost for the product or cost for shipping, which can vary depending on where you're shipping to, right? So if you are going to be delivering some kind of physical product as part of your subscription, you really have to make sure that you take that into account. It's especially true if any of those tier levels are going to have a physical product tied to them, whether that be a paperback, a hardback, whatever it happens to be. You'll want to make sure that you've done the math on each of your subscription tiers. Make sure that it makes sense for you, that you're going to be in the profit, right, each month, that somebody's paying for that subscription. And then it also needs to make sense to the reader. Would it just be simpler for them to go get your books off of Amazon if they're available there too? Or depending on how you're doing it, right? You want to make it enticing enough that you're going to get them to subscribe. Keep in mind, they stay subscribed. Somebody who maybe buys one of your books for $2.99, right? Every time you release. And maybe that person's going to buy, maybe you have 4 releases each year. Well, that approximately right there is about $12, right? There's fees you have to pay and all of that. I totally understand that. But you're making about $12 from that person. That's an equivalent of like $1 a month on a subscription service. Could you charge $2 a month? Would that seem fair to them? And maybe you can offer them something a little bit extra and exclusive that's not just your books. And that way you kind of make it out ahead, but it still feels like a good deal to them. Those are the things you have to consider. And that's the math you have to try to do there. And what all can you offer to them that makes it enticing, makes it look like a good deal, but it's still a good deal for you on the back end, right? Free is also an option. And it can be a great way to just get readers to engage with your Patreon. If you have a free access to your Patreon, oftentimes they'll still have to subscribe. It's not that everything is just open, right? You can do that as well, but you can have them still have to subscribe to your Patreon. Just make it free, and they get access to some of the content there. And then you can always entice them to upgrade at a later date. This is also really useful to continue to funnel and sort through different groups of readers, like your newsletter subscribers, or maybe if you have a social media following on a particular platform. Promoting your Patreon to your newsletter subscribers, your free Patreon, even just a free Patreon, is a way for you to kind of gauge, okay, these are my fans who are subscribed to my newsletter, and these here are my super fans. They want even more. They took the extra step and they went over and they subscribed to my Patreon, and I can offer them something exclusive over there. So even if you don't do charged, tiers, having different pricing tiers, and go all the way up to some ridiculous Patreon tiers that I've seen on some creators accounts, where it's like $250 a month for some Patreon tiers, things like that. You don't even have to do that. Even just a free Patreon, and you can run it sort of like a club in a way, is also useful. So there's lots of range here in terms of how you can set up the tiers of your subscription. So I promised examples. I have 2 here. On the one hand, we're going to be looking at kind of a beginner's example of some subscription tiers. So here we have a $0 free tier where they just get access to your Patreon page and whatever content you put there, and maybe content that is only available there. Now, Patreon and a lot of these other platforms kind of run sort of like a social media platform. You can post images, text, video, that sort of thing. So if you find that maybe social media platforms are struggling to grow on there, you're posting stuff regularly, but nobody's really paying attention to it, it might be better to go the Patreon route or something similar, and have a smaller, tight-knit group of readers who are really engaged, and you can keep them on a platform where they're primarily going to be engaging with you anyway. On Facebook, there's tons of stuff to scroll through. It's very easy to get distracted by all the stuff that's going on Facebook. And so having a place where you can communicate more directly, where you can post content, and we're not even necessarily talking about book content here, but where you can post content that your readers might be interested in, and in a setting that's there's a little bit less noise. Just that alone can be worth it. Now you could also have here's an example of just a $1 support tier. They don't necessarily get a whole lot of extra benefits. Maybe there's something that you offer them, but it's just a way of them showing extra support. right? Uh, Kind of like a tip jar, so to speak. And some services do have this more tip jar style feature where it might be a one-time donation or something like that. It might not be monthly, right? But something simple to just get the ball rolling. I know a $1 donation per month or a $1 subscription doesn't sound all that amazing, right? It doesn't sound earth-shattering, but it also, again, you can use it as a litmus test and a gauge for how engaged your readers are. This is kind of a way to get things started. One thing about Patreon and about a subscription service or any subscription model that you choose to employ, there's kind of a herd mentality, right? If you will. Maybe that's not the best phrase, but uh, uh, readers are going to, and this is just consumers in general, right? They're going to see what other consumers are doing. What are other consumers buying? What are they investing in, right? And they're going to do the same thing. So you have to start from somewhere. If your first Patreon tier, when you release your Patreon, is $10, you might not get that many people to sign up. But if you get people to sign up to your free tier and the $1 tier, and you build that up over time, then it's easier to introduce a higher tier. An example I'm going to show here, a $5 tier. Now we can offer something exclusive like a monthly live stream, short story, something along those lines. If I've already built up these two tiers here, now it makes a lot more sense to introduce this one. For starters, there's going to be some of these folks here who are going to be like, yeah, that's worth it. I'm going to upgrade my subscription. But then to other folks, you're going to be able to say, hey, look, I've got 30, 40, 50 people who are subscribed to my Patreon. Join them over here for some exclusive content. Also, there's this new $5 option where you can get this, and this, or maybe this, or this is probably better at first, right? And we want to be careful not to overpromise. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the webinar here too. But this is just an example of how you could get started and build these tiers. I would probably build them one at a time. Start with your free tier, start putting some content on there, then introduce shortly thereafter this sort of tip jar, depending on how you want to do it. Different platforms are going to offer you different features as well. And then something simple that's low cost that you can deliver on a monthly basis. So now for something a little bit more advanced, right? Here's an example. $10 a month could give readers access to your back catalog plus new releases through BookFunnel restricted pages. BookFunnel does integrate with Patreon. And so one thing that you can do is have restricted pages that are set up for all the books in your back catalog. They subscribe to your Patreon, they can get access to those books. You can also restrict them to the BookFunnel app. And what this would allow you to do, this is optional, not something you'd have to do, but to just give you an idea of some of the tools you have at your disposal. What you could do if you have those books restricted to the BookFunnel app and Cloud Reader, anybody who's actively subscribed to your Patreon would get access to all of those books through their library. They would not be able to send it to another device. They could only read it in their library. But then if they choose to cancel their subscription, you can also contact BookFunnel support. Let us know this person has canceled their subscription. They should no longer have access to these books, and we can remove them from their BookFunnel library, essentially meaning that those books are only available to them if they are subscribed actively to your Patreon. That's an example of something that you could do. Now, you don't have to do it that way, right? It might be a little bit more friendly to your readers to say, yeah, subscribe, and you subscribe monthly, you'll get the new releases and anything new that comes out. The back catalog is yours to keep, right? Whether you cancel or not, but you do have some more control there if you wanted to, right? To give you an idea of how you could work with that. Now, at the $25 tier here, the example I have is all previous rewards. Most rewards in these cases are going to be cumulative. So they're going to be getting whatever rewards were at the lower tiers, plus a monthly paperback that's going to be delivered to their door. So you would obviously have to do the math on this. Maybe it's a paperback for a novella or a short story, or maybe you mix it up each month. You can kind of average out the cost of what it's going to be to deliver it to each reader who's subscribed to this tier. Most of these platforms do also have tools for you to collect your subscribers' address information so that you can ship stuff to them. And there's multiple different ways, especially with print-on-demand services these days, where you can do this fairly simply and not even necessarily have to ship these books yourself, right? You don't necessarily need to have a huge box of books shipped to you and then you package all of those and ship them out. You certainly could. And in fact, that would be a great opportunity for you to, right, build some community with your readers, but you don't necessarily have to. Right? In this example, $25, right? We're adding $15 onto that $10 price tag, right? If it's going to cost me maybe $10 to deliver a short story in paperback form through a print-on-demand service that I send out an individual copy, then I'm making an extra $5 on top of that. Maybe that math checks out. Again, this is just an example. You'll have to do the math depending on how you're planning to deliver and all of that stuff. So keep that in mind. Right. And then an example, $50 a month gets you all the previous reward tiers plus audiobooks. So you get everything in audio format, previous releases, upcoming releases, etc. For those who really want the audiobook rewards, this could be an enticing tier for them. Now, all these price points are just examples. You might be thinking, am I really going to get someone to pay $50 to sign up for my Patreon just with audiobooks? Well, maybe there are authors out there who are doing that sort of thing. But what it really depends on is how much content do you have available. If you've got a back catalog that you can leverage, then yeah, you might be able to do that more feasibly. If you don't yet, if your back catalog is very small or maybe non-existent, right? Maybe you're on your first book or something like that, then this is something to aspire to. This is something to aim for maybe later on down the line. And maybe you're also another way to kind of slice this here is not necessarily just beginner and advanced, but how much content do you have to offer? How big is the library that you have built, that you have written, that you can offer to your readers? Obviously, there are going to be some authors for whom $50 a month is a steal for their content and what all they can provide. That's probably not going to be everybody, and that's fine. These are just some examples here. Remember, you can start small. You can start here on this side and slowly work your way to some of these advanced methods later on. And maybe that's 5-10 years down the road, but it's going to be much easier to get here if you start with something small and simple. So what content to include? We've already talked about some of the content and the examples I've given, but I want to kind of list it out here with a few ideas. And by no means is this exhaustive. There's lots of other things that you could include. And I'm sure there's some folks who even have ideas. Feel free to share any ideas you have in the comments. But obviously, exclusive stories and book content is probably like the most obvious that should come to mind right away. Right, releasing a monthly short story exclusive or deliver your new releases in advance. This is one option. You can kind of do pre-orders this way, in a way. Whoever subscribed to your Patreon, you get the book a month ahead of time, and maybe also offering it in a format that they might not always get later on. Maybe you release through Kindle Unlimited right now. Pre-orders are a great way for you to also get your books to the readers in your audience who are not Kindle Unlimited subscribers or users, right? Because you can deliver it to them ahead of time before that book is even enrolled in Kindle Unlimited or KDP Select, right? And you could do this with Patreon in much a similar way. Extended editions, the sky's the limit here, right? Behind the scenes content is also something that some of your readers are going to be very interested in. You can pull back the curtain on your writing process. You could offer maybe some of your notes, outlines, some of the rough drafts Some readers are interested in that sort of thing. Maybe not like the full rough draft, but maybe some parts of the book that really changed. And you can show them, hey, this is how this book kind of transformed over time, deleted chapters, things like that. There are even some authors who do things like writing and editing streams where you're literally on stream writing the book and the readers can be there and engage with you. This is the type of thing that at first it might not seem like there's going to be a whole lot of people interested in this. You might even doubt yourself, like who's really going to want to know all of this stuff? Who's really going to be interested in finding this out? There are going to be some of your readers who will and would be willing to sign up just to get access to some of this content. Now, it's a numbers game. I say that a lot, but it really is a numbers game. So you just kind of have to consider how big is your overall audience? What segment of that audience is really going to be, your raving fans who are going to sign up for your Patreon, and maybe not all of those are going to be interested in the behind the scenes content. Maybe most of them will just want the exclusive stories and that sort of thing, but some of them will still appreciate it. So it's still something you can offer though. And so I wouldn't undervalue it in any sense. There's going to be readers who are interested in this sort of thing. All right, so don't sell yourself short in that regard. And then reader engagement. You have the opportunity here to get your readers involved with your writing process. Let them vote on character names, the next book you're going to write. This is something that Katie Cross brought up in our Q&A that we did a few months back. We were talking about Facebook ads in that Q&A, but the topic of direct sales came up. And in a sense, Patreon really is a direct sales method, is what it is. But she asks her readers which book in the series that they want to see come next. And oftentimes she said she found that she was thinking of writing this book, but they asked for something totally different. They wanted her to continue this other series instead and write that book next. So you can get some input and feedback from readers the readers who are really your super fans, who are really engaged, who are going to read everything you're going to release anyway. You can help them feel involved and invested in your writing, right? You can even, in some cases here, let them determine some of the plot outcomes in your current work in progress, for example, as one possibility. Some people may not want to relinquish that that sort of thing, but it's an option that you have. It's an example of something you can offer to your patrons. Now, let's compare some of these services here. So the big three are going to be Patreon, Ko-fi, and Buy Me a Coffee. Those last two, of course, can sometimes be a little confusing because they're very similar. Patreon is going to be most familiar to readers. It integrates with BookFunnel. It has a lot of robust subscription tools. However, it does have some of the higher fees in the industry, and there's generally some more setup involved. Ko-fi allows for one-time donations and subscriptions. Gives a little bit of flexibility there. There's no fees for donations on Ko-fi, and it's a simple setup for Ko-fi. There's also shop features. You can actually set up a shop or a direct store with Ko-fi. There's some limited customization, however. When you compare it to Patreon, there's fewer community tools. It's not as robust, but it is a little bit simpler. Now, Buy Me a Coffee is similar to Ko-fi in some respects. It allows one-time donations and subscriptions. They have very fast payouts and some of the lowest fees in the industry. There's going to be limited options here, though, limited tier options and marketing tools when you compare it to Patreon. So to kind of summarize, if you want to build a very robust community and have like lots of different reward tiers, and kind of you're going for that higher expectation, then Patreon is probably the way to go. Readers and those who support authors through Patreon do tend to have higher expectations. Patreon is sort of the premier service in this regard. Ko-fi is great for authors who are looking for simplicity, if you just want some flexibility. And you want to accept both one-time donations and subscriptions without as high fees as Patreon. Maybe you don't need you're not going to be as super involved with it. All right, then that might be an option for you. Buy me a coffee is really ideal for those who just want, if you just want it something straightforward and you don't need lots of customization, you don't need a lot of those gizmos, right? You just want something really simple and easy, then that might be the way for you to go. Now, there are obviously other options other than just these three here. One of those being you could just do it yourself, right? You could set up a subscription service on your website. You can charge subscriptions through various payment platforms. That's something you can absolutely do. You're kind of building everything from the ground up, though. And so the real pro to doing it all yourself is that you have a lot of control over the creative aspects of it. The con there is that you're going to have to do a lot of the work to build that. There's going to be lots of tools that you're going to need to learn in order to make something like that work. And it can be a lot of extra management. For example, just in terms of cancellations of subscriptions, if somebody wants to cancel their Patreon subscription, Patreon makes that pretty easy, and they kind of handle that side of the business. Whereas if you're doing it all yourself, you're going to have to do it all yourself, right? So that's something to consider, right? And there are other platforms too. If there is a platform that you have experience with, or a platform that you know, or maybe you are using, go ahead and put it in the comments. We can bring it up in the Q&A here and discuss it for sure. So some best practices and pitfalls here before we get to the Q&A, some things that I want to mention and kind of reiterate, honestly. Start small. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew, especially if you're already juggling a lot of different things when it comes to your author business. So you already, if you have a daily word goal that you're aiming for, and you have to edit your most recent manuscript, and you're going back and forth with your cover designer on your upcoming release, getting that cover sorted, and you're trying to do your social media, and then you got to check in on your ads, and there's lots of stuff to be done when it comes to self-publishing. And so you want to start small. If you're going to start a subscription service like this, I wouldn't recommend that you just dive into the deep end, right? Some of those beginner options that I mentioned might be a good way to go. Start with maybe some lower expectations on your part, right? And then see where things go. Consistency, like it is with everything, it is the key to having a successful Patreon or subscription model. Any subscription model is going to fail if you don't produce consistent content. It needs to be something you can work into your schedule and that you can commit to. Right? You can't expect for it to just kind of sit there and take care of itself. It has to be something that you put time and effort and energy in order to make it work, even at a beginner level. It's still going to take time and energy. And so you have to make sure that you have the bandwidth for that sort of thing to stay consistent and to avoid burnout. You want to err on the side of offering something simple and easy to manage that there's a typo here, that you can sustain. That should say that you can sustain. It needs to be something that you can, at whatever phase you're starting it at, something that you can keep, just even if it stays the way it is, that you can keep that going consistently month in and month out. Right. The one thing about not having a subscription, we talked about the predictability and the stability of having like a Patreon that pays your bills. While that sounds great, that comes with deadlines, right? That comes with other stuff. And so you have to balance that out. And maybe for you, deadlines are great and it really helps motivate you. Maybe it doesn't though, right? And maybe that can lead to some burnout. You push yourself too far, and you wind up in a position where you're not able to then fulfill what you've promised. And that's kind of what I'm going to wrap it up here with. You have to keep your promises if you're going to do a subscription model like this, whether it's Patreon, Ko-fi, or what have you. You want to avoid over promising and under delivering. You want to offer things that you can realistically deliver on by the promised date, whatever that happens to be, right? So that brings us to the end of that presentation. I want to get to your questions now. Whatever you might have, we can go into a discussion here about some of this stuff, go back, recap some things if we need to. Emma and Kelly, what do the folks want to talk about today?
All right. Hello. Okay, so one of the questions that we just got, and Emma and I were in here testing it, is from Marie. We have other questions, but so it's out of order. But Marie is asking, does BookFunnel integrate with PayHip subscription service? So
Yeah.
I have it already set up to I was playing with it and doing some testing on it before. So I went back into my account
Hmm?
and worked on it. And it doesn't have any sort of product page for your tier.
Yeah.
Instead, you would use a link, BookFunnel landing page link, in order to deliver for each of your tiers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that we really don't support subscription models from or subscription payments from any of our integrated services currently. So even if you had a PayHip link, you wouldn't you could charge for it for sure. The way you get around that with these sorts of things is usually through your mailing list service. So, for example, you could connect PayHip to MailerLite if you're using MailerLite. I mean, PayHip connects to most other mailing list services too, but I'm just going to use that as an example. So you have PayHip connected to MailerLite. You have MailerLite connected to BookFunnel. In this case, you may or may not need PayHip connected to BookFunnel if you're just doing a subscription service, if you're not doing direct sales, right? And what you can do is when somebody subscribes to through PayHip, you can have them added to a group in MailerLite. You can have that trigger an automation that will send them an email with a link to download a book, for example. And that group in MailerLite can be connected to, say, a restricted page on BookFunnel. So that restricts the delivery of those rewards to that specific group in MailerLite. And the only way they get to that group in MailerLite is if they subscribed through your PayHip, right? Or Shopify should be able to do the same thing. Most other stores should be able to do something very similar. So that would be the way that you would go about setting it up. It's a little bit more complex than just a simple direct sales. Direct sales through BookFunnel is really intended for one-time purchases as opposed to subscription models. So you'll want to do some more investigating. The one exception, of course, there being sort of Patreon in a way, although BookFunnel doesn't treat Patreon as a sales platform. We treat it more like a mailing list service. It goes through the same type of integration as other mailing list services do. And that allows you to directly link your Patreon tiers to specific restricted landing pages that you have set up on BookFunnel, meaning that somebody would have to be at a certain tier level or higher in order to access a book through that restricted page. So Patreon would be kind of the only one where you could just do it with one simple integration. However, you would probably still want a mailing list integration for your mailing list and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you did a restricted page, because they have where you can make a post. If
Mm-hmm.
you had, and that post can only be seen by XYZ tier, you could have your restricted page set
Yep.
to your own. So basically you can do your own
Yep.
integration.
Yep. Well, and heck, if you have a restricted page for a specific tier of your Patreon, you could put that link wherever you want, right? You could put that anywhere. You could have it, publicly available, and only the folks who have the correct credentials through Patreon would be able to access it. So you could post it in Patreon for sure, and that there would be some questions. I'm sure some folks would think of, what if somebody like shares their login information? Well, that could happen whether or not you post that link, regardless of where you post that link. So that's something that can possibly, can occur. You know that sort of thing. Another reason why you might want to restrict your books to the BookFunnel Cloud Reader if you're going to be doing a subscription service like this, where they won't be able to download the files, they can only read them in the BookFunnel Cloud. Gives some exclusivity to it and gives you control over how those files are managed. We could go on and on about that, right? It's kind of up to you what you want to go with in that regard, but yeah, right. Patreon would let you kind of just do it real simple. That would be the benefit of that.
Okay, so we have some another question. Joe is asking, how far in advance can BookFunnel be used to market books? He's asking because he's launching a picture book series for
Okay,
6 to 8-year-old children between May and September of 2025. So a
gotcha,
little less than a year out. Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah. So if you have some sort of content to deliver, maybe it is only a sample of your work. What I usually tell authors, if you're writing more of a like a novel, like do you have at least a chapter, right? Do you have a sample chapter that you can offer, right? Uh, then you have something to provide. With a picture book, a little bit different, but like, yeah, do you have a sample, right? A page or two or something that's already completed, or something that you can deliver that will be of interest to readers, then yeah, you can start even this far in advance, but potentially a year in advance of when your book is releasing. I don't think it's too soon in order to do that. The one thing you just have to consider and keep in mind is that if you're not offering a full book yet, regardless of whether you're writing a novel or a picture book, if you're if you don't have a full book ready to go, it will be a little slow going at first. But that's not to say that you can't start building an audience, build a mailing list, right? And then expand from there. So once you have some real content to release. So as long as you have some type of content to give the reader, you should be fine. You should be fine. But I would make sure you have something, right? Right. Uh, Otherwise, right? Like if you have a plan to write a novel and you haven't written anything yet, maybe BookFunnel is maybe you're not ready yet. You need to have something to give your readers, typically in book form, right? In order to kind of get started with BookFunnel, would be like the bare minimum, I would say.
Okay. Amy is asking, I'd like to know your thoughts on combining services on Patreon. I am an author and a digital artist planning to create character art based on my own work and other authors. Would it be better to combine or have separate Patreons? Great
Hmm.
question.
Yeah, that is a good question. The way I see that there is kind of like it's two separate brands. So if you're creating artwork for your own books and for your own characters, I think that makes sense to even have that under the umbrella of your author brand, right? So that would make sense to include that in the same Patreon where you're like delivering short stories or whatever it is that's related to your books. However, if you're doing artwork for like other authors, I see that as kind of its own brand, or just around your artwork itself. And I think the one thing that you have there is a little bit of overlap in content. So, which is actually maybe a benefit, not a downside, which is that if you make some art for one of the characters in your book, you could have that in both Patreon model, right? Subscriptions, right? On both accounts, if you will. And then the folks who are going to be interested in your artwork brand more exclusively would, right, they're going to sign up over there, and then maybe hey, they'll realize, oh, you write too, you're a writer too, this is like your character, and then they're maybe interested in coming over here and seeing what you're doing. When you kind of throw it all together, it can be maybe a little confusing uh, for them to kind of figure out what exactly is going on, right? So you want to introduce them to one of your brands, and then they can discover the other one naturally through that one. So with your author brand, it'd be the same sort of thing. If you made some artwork for your characters or something like that, and you put it in your author Patreon. And it's a quick and easy segue to be like, hey, yeah, I make other art over here. You can go check it out, right? And link them together. I think that would probably, looking at it in the long term, that's probably the best way to do it. However, there's also a question of like how realistic is that to manage two different subscription services and that sort of thing. And maybe you don't really do a whole lot of artwork for other authors just yet. Maybe you don't need to have them separated out just yet. You can kind of keep it in one spot for now and maybe branch out in the future. Right? All that should be taken into consideration. But I think if you're at that stage where, yeah, you have two, so again, two separate brands, it's not that they can't be connected to each other in some way, but the primary subscription connected to each of them, I would keep separate, right? I would keep those separate. That way, when somebody shows up to it and they discover your content, they know what they're getting, and they know what they've stumbled upon. They're not going to be kind of confused about like what book is this character from? Oh, it's from a different author's book. What's oh, okay, I'm confused, right? That's what I potentially see happening. So if you had one for just your artwork, they know what they're getting over there, and then they can get connected over to your author brand over here, and vice versa.
Okay, so Evie is asking, what do you think about offering a monthly book club for your readers as a subscription, or maybe a lottery for subscribers for a one-off tabletop campaign?
Oh, interesting. So like a monthly book club, I guess the question would be, um, like you're going to be reading a book together is I think is the assumption, and they're like in a book club with you. Is that what I'm understanding?
I'm
Uh,
thinking it was yeah, like a book. Yep,
yeah.
it's
Okay, yeah.
confirmed.
But like you're all they get to be in a book club with you, and you guys are gonna like get together and chat about it. You'll have like maybe a weekly book club meeting, and it's going to be some other author's book you're reading, but it may be related by genre. I think that could be really neat. I think there's some readers who would actually be interested in that. Now, I mean, it might not seem as like on the outside as like it's your business, right? Shouldn't it be serving you and that sort of thing? But it's reader engagement. So I think that's good. That's really good. And, why not read books that inspired you? You can kind of connect it in that respect. Like if I did a book club, it'd be kind of boring. We'd be reading lots of Isaac Asimov and Frank Herbert and stuff like that. And not everybody is, I don't know who has the patience to sit down and read Dune in a book club style setting. But maybe it makes maybe you have some great ideas for that. I think that could work. And maybe that again, start simple with that. I don't know how much folks are going to be willing to pay necessarily to be part of a book club with their author. If it were their favorite author, maybe a little bit. Obviously, at some point, charging for it is just keeping it reasonable, right? If you have 1,000 people who want to join your book club, that's unmanageable, right? If you charge something for it, does that drop it down to 100? Okay, right now it's worth your time, and maybe that's more manageable, right? That's kind of the way to look at that. And then as far as like, yeah, tabletop gaming, I know another author brought this up to me recently. There's a lot of authors out there doing this, especially with things like Dungeons and Dragons. That seems to be the most popular one. I know. I haven't heard of anybody who's done it with other tabletop games yet. But like making their own role playing games around their characters and their world. It can be a fun side project. It could also be. I would just be careful that it's something that you can deliver on, and then it's not going to be too distracting from the rest of your work, right? You can deliver on that sort of thing. And then once you've done it, yeah, it becomes something that's always there. And it's another piece of content that you can, tout when you're promoting your Patreon or what have you. and then you can kind of just expand on it, as you want to. It just becomes, who knows? I mean, maybe you have the bandwidth to to expand on something like that every month. And who knows, these days with 3D printing, you could probably hire some artists to take your characters, turn them into 3D models. Oh man, okay, you're getting me thinking now. I am personally more of a Warhammer 40K player myself, so I wouldn't go for the Dungeons and Dragons aspect of it. It would have to be a little different. But I know I'm the minority. Most tabletop, uh, uh, most people who play tabletop games, especially with miniatures, are playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I could see that being very popular, especially if you write in fantasy or a genre that, that's a natural fit. So absolutely.
Okay. Serena is asking, what do you recommend for integrating a mailing list from WordPress that isn't supported because it isn't supported by BookFunnel? I have WordPress newsletter plugin because it's free on my WordPress site to manage my newsletter, but I don't see it on the list.
Yeah, yep. So we do not have an integration with that particular plugin. You may be able, it is free, although I don't know to what extent, like what tools you have with it and so forth. Um, it's just not a platform that we integrate with. So if you're looking at it just purely from the mailing list standpoint, most authors will do. And what BookFunnel does support is you can manually export your subscribers that you get through BookFunnel, and you can upload them manually to your newsletter in whatever service you happen to be using. So you can upload them directly. Is what you can do. And that's how I would, if you're really right committed to using that as your newsletter service, totally fine. That would be the option that you have there, is um, just to manually upload them over there. Did I miss a part of that question, or was that pretty much the gist of it?
I think that was, yeah, I
Okay.
think that was pretty much it.
All right. For a moment there, you started asking the question. It kind of, you didn't cut out or anything. My brain was just a little all over the place.
Your brain just went,
Yes.
whoops.
And actually, there's a
See?
comment here. Zapier may have a way to connect between WordPress and BookFunnel. It's quite possible that they might. Zapier is a service that we integrate with, so worth checking out. Zapier can be a little pricey, so just keep that in mind. If you're doing
Yeah.
something simple with Zapier, it's usually okay. It's when you're trying to do some really complicated stuff where Zapier can kind of add up over time. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and EB is saying, or has asked, and I think this was during the conversation that we had before about the author and the designer, separating them. Evie's asking, does that mean you believe that authors should have different pen names for different genres? I've seen that as a matter of debate in the indie community.
Yeah, I think that's a little different. I think it highly depends on how you approach it and what genres you write in. I personally, um, I got some advice from my editor. Oh gosh, this is over a decade ago. I'm so old. uh, anyway. And what he told me is that your name is a gift, and you should not. Because I was asking him, should I write under a pen name? But for those of you, I think you can see my last name here on Zoom. I will not tell you how to pronounce it. You can guess. I was like, should I write under a pen name? Because my last name is a little weird and it's Lithuanian. People are going to be like, what is that? Jack Shilkatitis? Shilakata, well, they say all kinds of different things. The benefit of that is that on the phone, when somebody's calling and they're asking for Jack, so and so, I'm like, oh no, nobody of that name is here. But what he said is, no, just go with your name, and it's a gift, so use it, and people will learn that name, right? And you'll stand out. Well, um, I think in a similar respect, that's more about using your own name versus using a pen name. But in that respect, even if you chose a pen name, the only situation in which I see you would really need to write under a different pen name is if the genres you write in are like oil and water and they just don't mix, and you need a real clear way to keep things separate. Like, do you write space operas, like hard sci-fi over here, and like billionaire romance on the side? Probably want two separate pen names for that. But do you write in fantasy and sci-fi, or do you write in horror and sci-fi? I don't, I pers my this is my personal opinion. This is my personal opinion. I don't think that you necessarily need it, right? I don't think that you necessarily need a separate pen name for something like that, so long as those genres have some overlapping readership and your readers aren't going to be confused when they like look at your Amazon page and they see like some weird mix of genres, right? That's something to that's the way I would look at it, right? And then right, somebody did bring up here a good point. There's fiction, and then nonfiction, and so you might be writing nonfiction that's, maybe related to your work or what have you. Maybe you're a doctor, right? And you write nonfiction related to your particular field of medicine, and then over here you're writing fiction. Okay, it makes sense to have different pen names there. I think pen names are should serve a purpose. It's fun to come up with new pen names and that sort of thing. Um, but otherwise, I think they should serve a specific purpose for you, which is to distinguish between different genres that you write in that you don't necessarily want to mix audiences on. That's the way I see it. Up to you, though. Up to you if you wanted to do whatever. Who knows, right? If you wanted to write everything under the same name or have different pen names for every genre you're interested in, I think you kind of have some choice there. But that is my opinion. I think you should kind of try to stick with as few pen names as possible. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. For says, or when you don't want your family to know you write erotic fiction.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
We do see the gambit here, and it's definitely like, you do see where, you have you know, the oil and water going on and different pen
yeah,
names.
absolutely.
And we absolutely, embrace that, and that's definitely something. Yeah, if you're in different genres, even if it could be a marketing thing too. Like, let's say you are writing sci-fi, hard sci-fi, and then you also want to put together a paranormal romance or something like that. You could, under your own name or that same name, um publish your books under that same name, but you might get some audience confusion. And so even if it's not oil and water and they're not significantly like, you wouldn't want to have a Christian romance and the billionaire steamy stuff together. Even if it's not that extreme, sometimes it's all about making that marketing choice and saying,
Yeah.
I don't really want to put the same name on these books because they are different audiences and they like different things.
The one exception, because we brought up fiction and nonfiction, the one exception there is if you are an author who has had some success and you're writing nonfiction about author stuff, right? Writing, publishing, whatever it is, you probably want to use the same name because people are going to recognize, oh, that's him. Yeah, of course. Right. Oh, he wrote a nonfiction book. So that's a case where actually using the same name would be helpful, even though fiction and nonfiction might seem like that an example where you'd want to use two different names. In that case, they're related to each other, so it makes sense. So it's a case by case basis too.
Yeah, there's like I was just thinking of, some of the romance authors like Theodore Taylor. She writes like steamy romance, interracial romance books, and she also has her books that are universal fantasy, like teaching authors how to like get that little extra butter in your books so that people want to read it. Like, why do you read emotionally? Why do you read a book? And you say, well, because I want to feel whatever. And she kind of helps to tone that in. She's really great. But yeah, if she didn't write it under her name that is her romance pen name, you wouldn't see that success that she's had and be able to tie it to it. And same with, I think Zoe York is another author that
Mhm.
has, help books out there. So yeah.
Yep.
I heard that's what I heard. Supposedly, single genre authors are more algorithm friendly. I don't know if that's legit or not.
Yeah. I mean, the algorithm is outside of your control anyway. So I don't know that I would, I wouldn't place all my bets on the algorithm anyway. So, I wouldn't let that be the deciding factor if you really want to use the same name in multiple genres. If that's what you want to do, you know.
I think it's a good idea too, sometimes that if you have like, I want to make a new pen name that does XYZ, you
Yeah.
could still share that pen name with your current audience, and then you might have that crossover. So that's always good too. I mean, if you're, unless they're, super secret pen name, then
Yeah,
maybe
no,
don't.
obviously there are probably some situations in which the algorithm does get confused by it, especially if the genres are way off from each other. I think it's what it comes back to is reader behavior. And so, like, we're talking about Amazon here. How does Amazon know who to show your book to? Yeah, there's definitely a question there. If you're writing in two totally different, again, oil and water genres, yeah, maybe there's an argument to be made there. You're probably going to want to use separate pen names anyway, though, right? If you were writing in, say, hard science fiction, and then you wanted to do something steampunk, mm, those are a little bit closer to each other. I personally wouldn't be too worried about the algorithm, but if you really were, you could use a pen name there too. So again, opinion. It's an opinion, folks. So if you disagree, that's fine. You can do whatever you want, but that's my thoughts. And I tend to make those sort of decisions uh, based on I don't make my decisions based on the algorithm, right? I have to be true to myself. That's me. And I don't judge anybody if you make decisions otherwise. But
Okay. I think that was the last question. Evie's asking about our webinars coming up. Segue.
yes, we do. Currently, right now, we don't have any that you can sign up. We do two a month. I like to have a little bit of a gap. We used to do like a new webinar. Well, it wasn't even really a new webinar each week, but we did a different topic each week, and we would go back and repeat some topics and things like that. And what I've been trying to do with the webinars is do fewer of them, right? We were doing, like one a week is like four a month. I've been trying to shift to doing really just, you know, I don't want to just say higher quality, but dive into some deeper topics. Like last week, we were talking about Facebook ads. It feels um sometimes it felt like we would dive into some topic that where there was a lot of interest for, and then we would go back to something that was like something we'd talked about before. So I would rather take our time and just discuss topics that our users are really interested in. So actually, this is the perfect time. If there's a topic that you want to see in a webinar, put that in the chat here because I do read that. And that's where I've gotten some. In fact, the two webinars we did this month on Patreon and Facebook ads, those were requests from authors who attended previous webinars. I try to take that stuff into account. And so I give a little bit of a buffer time for me to kind of figure out, okay, we have October coming up here. What are we planning for October? What are people interested in? What do they want to see? And that sort of thing. Those announcements go out in bulletins, right? Our bi-weekly bulletin. We send it out every other week. And we announce our webinars and some other stuff. And so you can, that's how you'll be notified of those. We kind of let you know when they're ready to go. And then from there, we've kind of switched to that. So instead of having like a huge menu of upcoming webinars that are going on, right? We want to keep it focused on just like we have these two topics coming up next month. And that also means more people attend those webinars We get more engagement from authors, and it makes sense all around. I think to do it that way, keep everybody focused a little bit on two things we want to talk about, and then also leave some room for like if this new topic comes up, or who knows, something big happens in the world of self-publishing between now and October, we have time to adapt and and that sort of thing, and maybe come up with a new topic. So I see we even have a few ideas that have come in here. So from EB, I'd be interested in promo services, which are reliable, which aren't, bargain booksy, etc. Yeah, we did talk about promo services kind of briefly when we did our 10 ways to market your book webinar. That was, I believe that was last month. It's one segment of that webinar, though. It's not the whole thing. We could expand into that. And what I think would be really awesome, actually, would be to have some actual numbers and results that we could which Emma and Kelly, maybe we can get the higher ups to pitch in a budget for us to actually test all those services, right? And see, maybe that's an idea that could be interesting. And then from Joe, can you do future webinars how genre specific authors can best benefit from BookFunnel? Yes, this is something that I have an idea for this. You guys are here, so you're going to hear it, or I guess some of those of you watching the replay too, right? Which is kind of doing an author round table for some of the major genres and bringing in actual BookFunnel authors from those genres to have a discussion on how BookFunnel has helped them, right? But not just to be self-serving on our part, but like some actual tips and advice from those authors on how they approach just self-publishing in general. But then, yeah, how have they incorporated BookFunnel in that sort of thing? So I would see each of those as kind of being their own separate thing. I wouldn't want to do like one webinar where we bring in 10 romance authors for 15 minutes and then we jump to sci-fi authors, right? I would want to flesh that out, invite some guests, and do it in that style. That's an idea that I have been toying with for that specific specific type of thing. So you may see something about that in the near future. I think yes, I do think it would be awesome. So yeah, EB, if you're doing some spreadsheeting and you have some results, if you're using some of those services, I would be interested in seeing some of that data, and maybe that's something we could build off of. If you're willing to share it, obviously just reach out to support, BookFunnel support at bookfunnel.com if you wouldn't mind sharing. And that might actually help kind of as a basis for doing a webinar on that topic as well. But alrighty, I think that's everything, folks. We could go on and on forever, though. Of course. Make sure you head over to YouTube and check out the channel there. The channel is technically it's been around for a while, right? Like the channel was established a while ago. I think you create a Gmail account, you create a YouTube channel, something like that. So it's been there for a while, but we've just been recently adding some content there. The replay of this will be uploaded there, but we'll also be putting out some new content. I'm answering questions there as well. So if you comment on one of our videos on BookFunnel, there's a good chance I will reply to you with a video on the channel answering that question in short form video. So that's another thing, another way for you to engage with us. And then, of course, some other stuff that we're going to be doing there on that channel as well. But go check that out. If you just if you go to YouTube and you type in BookFunnel, because our channel is relatively new in terms of the content we've been releasing, you might not find us right away. So you might want to look for at BookFunnel, like with the at sign, then BookFunnel, and that should bring us up a little bit smoother. But all right, folks, thank you guys for joining us. We're going to wrap it up here for today. I hope this webinar was helpful for you guys, and we will see you all in the next one. Have a good day, folks. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.